For part B, we're writing the string formatter method. So the string formatter class contains all of these methods. That's how you can tell, because it says, right, the string formatter method, basic gap width. So this is the class. All of these are contained within this class. So anything that we do just in this class, that means like we can use these methods. But this one's asking us to write this method. So we're writing a single method. It's all contained in itself. And it returns, like this is, some people wonder why do you get this? Why, like this is a quick way for you to reference that basic gap width is supposed to return an integer, and it accepts as arguments a word list and the formatted length. So a list of words and also the length of your formatted string that you want to have output by this, or like for this class when you build it. So yes, we're writing basic gap width, and it says assume that total letters works as specified. So I'm thinking, well, what does total letters do? It takes in the list of words and counts up all the letters in that whole entire list, and it returns it. That's what this is good for. So you can quickly reference that and see what it does. Assume, or you could like go all the way back and see, but this is like your quick reference, that little box there. Assume that total letters works as specified, regardless of what you wrote in part A. You must use total letters appropriately to receive full credit. Complete method basic gap width below. Okay, so what we are going to do is understand that we have a list of words to work with, and we also have formatted length to work with, and I'm allowed to use my total letters method because it's within this it's within this class, so I can just use it. I can just call it whenever I want. So we are trying to get the basic gap width. So how many spaces are in this gap? That's the basic gap. That's this part. So we're counting up the basic gaps. I think, yeah, these are basic gaps. They're all the same size. The only ones that aren't the same size are when it doesn't divide evenly or there's some left over. Then you put those on starting at the left, going to the right. So here we need to figure out what this basic gap width is. Well, there are a certain number of spaces that's in the formatted length, and then there are also a certain number of words for all the lists. Everything left over is the gaps, is for the gaps. Hopefully that makes sense, because I have how many spaces that I want my whole entire formatted string to fit in. So that formatted length, that's the total number of usable spaces. And then I also can use total letters to figure out the number of letters. That's I'm filling in some of the spaces. So if I take the total number of spaces and I subtract the total letters, then I'll have the space for the gaps. But then I also have to figure out the gap width. Well, I was looking at this, at the examples here, and I was thinking, if I knew the number of gaps, I could just take the number of spaces and then divide it by the number of gaps, and then I would get spaces per gap. That's what I want to figure out. And I was thinking, okay, wait, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 words here. That means there are 3 gaps. Okay. Here there are 1, 2, 3, 4, also 3 gaps. So it's like one less gap than there are words. There are 2 words, so that means there is one gap. So that's I think the first thing that I'm going to do. I'm going to create an integer that tells me the number of gaps. Now you don't have to do this. You could just do the calculation on AP Central. They'll do some more concise code, but I'm going to do this. Int num of gaps, and that's just the number of words minus 1. So that's what I'm going to say. I'm going to get the number of words. Well, how do I figure out the number of words? That's simply word list dot size. But just what I figured out before, just above, that I said above, it's -1, and that's the number of gaps. There's always one less gap than there are words. So there we go, number of gaps. And then, what did I say that we needed to do? I need just to figure out the number of spaces available, or the number of space available after all those letters or all those words are put in, and then divide that by the number of gaps, and then I get spaces per gap, which is my basic gap width. That's what it was defined as in the first part. So I guess I can say the next thing, I'm really piecing these out. I'm not doing all the calculations in one line. I'm just going to do them separately. So what I want to do is get the total number of spaces that don't have letters. So I'm just going to say I'm going to create an integer called total spaces. Now this to me is the spaces after I put in the words. So like how many spaces are left? Well, that's simply the formatted length. That's the total number of spaces that are available. Maybe that's a bad name, but I should say unused space. And the unused space is simply the formatted length. That's the total number of spaces available minus the number of letters that I have. So I need to use my total letters method, and here is how I use it. I need to input a string. Well, that's nice because I have my string there, and well, that's it. So I put in word list, and that should give me the number of unused space. And then all I have to do to figure out the gap, like the spaces per gap, which is the basic gap width. All I have to do to figure that out is just take the unused space, and divide it by the number of gaps. Now, in this particular case, I want to do integer division, because if they don't give it, or if it doesn't divide evenly, then whatever is left over is for the leftover spaces. It's not included in the basic gap. So hopefully that makes sense to you. I'm doing integer division, so if I have like 5 unused spaces and I have 4 gaps, then the basic gap should be just 1. So that's what this would do. And then there's an extra space left over, which will be taken care of later. But the basic gap is using integer division, so I truncate. So I don't round at all. I want it to truncate, because the basic gap, all of them has a basic gap, and then maybe some to the left have more than the last couple. So basic gap is unused space divided by number of gaps, and then I need to return an integer, which is basic gap. Now you could write all of these in one line. So like you would use all of this in one line and then return, like in your return statement. But I feel like this is a little bit more understandable if I'm trying to explain it. But that's part B. Hopefully that was pretty simple. On to part C.